Hello and welcome to the VandySports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. I'm joined by my co-host, Billy Derrick, my good friend, Luke Wyatt. Gentlemen, we have been watching a lot of practice, spent a lot of time with both of you guys lately, particularly Billy. Thank you both for joining us tonight, and particularly to Luke, our guest, who was a regular part of the podcast this year and a very popular part. And if you're watching on YouTube, you now get to see what Luke looks like so you can pester him at a ball game. Luke, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Billy, I've enjoyed your work from afar. The fact that you work with George as well, I don't hold that against you, by the
way. Yeah, it's quite the juggle act, but no, it's been fun. He's great, and so is Chris. So I'm happy to be aboard with you guys.
It's going to be fun.
I can't believe we're halfway through practice. Billy and I have been to most of them. I think I've missed 2 practices so far out of the 10. I think Billy was at one of the ones that I missed, and at several of the ones that I was also at. Luke has been to a few on his own. And so we're all going to share our observations on practice. We'll get into the mailbag tonight. But first, Luke appears on our guest line, which is sponsored by the Wash House, and I'll give Billy the floor to tell you a little bit about the Wash House and my good buddy Steve Andrews, who is sponsoring our show this year.
Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. With 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh, and clean laundry, ready to be put away. Check them out on the web at www.washhouseclean.com. Again, that's washhouseclean.com, and stop in today and get your time back.
Podcast also sponsored by Murfreesboro Pure Milk. Davis, if you're listening, your ad copy will go here when we get that from you. And Sutherland and Belk, you'll hear from them later in the mailbag. Gentlemen, let's start with observations on practice, maybe big picture stuff. I was going to throw that to Luke. He has gone off the screen. So, Billy, I will throw it to you first and let Luke follow. Your big picture thoughts on what we've seen in practice so far.
You know, Chris, it's been interesting to follow practice. This has really been my first fall practice to be, close to the action, talk to coaches and players after practice. And obviously we're about, a week and a half, I guess you can say 2 weeks now into practice with 1 scrimmage under the belt. And, it was good to see Luke out there and kind of chop it up. But, I think one thing I've noticed, and again, it's hard to take too much out of, fall camp this early. But one thing I've noticed is the immediate and quicker growth of the culture as opposed to, maybe some other schools where it might just take longer for culture to build and chemistry to build. This is year 3. And we talked about this, in our last podcast together, Chris, how, it just feels like the organization is there. Everybody's more comfortable. Coach Lee is more comfortable. And Joey Lynch has talked about the rhythm. And Ken Seals even talked about that too, about how, everybody feels more in tune with what is going on in the offense, the plays that are being called. I've seen that, and you've told me that you've seen that. And then defensively, of course, obviously we saw how they struggled in the scrimmage, but they've also got, I don't even know how many guys out on that side of the ball. So again, I don't think you can really take a whole lot out of, the first couple weeks, but I will say the class of 2023 is a very talented class, and they're going to be very good in the future. I mean, just some guys to name a few. I think the running backs, Newberry and Benson, have looked good, in their opportunities. And then also Martell Height, a cornerback that has looked very good, and then a sophomore, even Trudell Berry as well, who is going to be, given opportunities this season. So I think a common theme has been the young guys that Clark Lee has brought in here to make immediate impacts. And, so far in practice, for what it's worth, I think they have made their presence felt, but they're also meshing well with the older guys. And I think that's very important and something that Clark wants to emphasize. So, yeah, Chris, for me, common theme is the young guys stepping up, and that's what Clark wanted to see in the scrimmage.
Luke?
Well, the thing for me, guys, has been I go back to Clark's first year, just how many, and we kind of talked about this before, Chris, how many of those guys could play for other SEC schools? You look around now, and there's several. I'm not sure there was more than a couple when Clark first got here. So when you see where we've come, I know we still have a long way to go, obviously, but we have come miles in the last 2 years. And the job that Barton, Simmons, and Clark have done, man, I applaud it big time. Of course, now talent is what it is. These freshmen are still freshmen, and you're going to get burned, and you're going to have some bad situations that will happen to them. But for the first time, he's got some quality depth at certain positions. For instance, wide receiver, the defensive line. We haven't had that yet. And just the fact that they're going to be able to do that, that's what I'm taking from it. I feel like that now the depth is going to be the difference in us getting to possibly 6 wins.
You guys both hit on things that I was going to hit on, and I wanted to expand on those and support your observations. Billy, you mentioned the culture. Yeah, I think it's not just the culture, the locker room, those kind of things, but it's conditioning and things like that. One thing that I've noticed, and my goodness, this was certainly an issue when Derek Mason was there at the end of his tenure. You'd see a lot of hands on the hips and guys out of shape and stuff like that. You don't see that much anymore. The next hands on hips episode, I've been looking for it, that I see in practice will be the first. And if you guys are not in Nashville, don't know, they practice every day. They start 9:30ish in the morning, go to about 12:30. I mean, some of that is loose. Sometimes they'll start a little later, end a little bit earlier. But point is, they're practicing. I mean, it could be worse. They could be practicing at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, but it's hot enough. There's been several days it's been in the 90s, and welcome to Nashville. It's also humid. So I'm looking for times when you're seeing guys dragging. You're not. Now, the first time I might have seen it was at Saturday scrimmage at Innsworth, or rather Sunday scrimmage, and it manifested in different ways. It manifested in a lot of grabbing and holding on behalf of defensive backs. Maybe the other day, I guess it was, I think it was maybe Friday. I don't remember. There was an altercation at the end of practice where I guess guys lost their cool, and Clark Lee let them have it over that. But for the most part, I think that what you said, Billy, has been spot on. Luke, you spoke to the depth. You had the same thing I was going to say, that a lot of guys, when Clark got his first roster, we look around going, who on this team's any good? Now I'm looking at situations where, like London Humphreys, I'm guessing he's a third-team wideout right now, but he has made some plays, boys. And he's, 3 years ago, I think London Humphreys does this in camp. He's probably a starting wideout for the opener. And I don't know if he's going to end up second team, third team. For all I know, he might start. But that's an example. Junior Sherrill, another freshman receiver, has had a really good fall camp. I think Junior Sherrill could end up maybe even challenging for a starting job at some point this season, maybe earlier rather than later. I don't know how much of that is just them kind of resting Jaden McGowan. You haven't seen him out there as much. They tend to do that sometimes with their own commodities. And I think the third thing, guys, and I want to get your thoughts on this particularly, Luke. The passing game has just won the day lately. And some of that you look and go, well, they've got AJ Swan, talented kid. You wanted to see him kind of take the next step, continue his progression. Feels like he's had a good camp. Ken Seals has had a really solid camp behind him. They've got some younger guys. Walter Taylor has been inconsistent but shown flashes. Drew Dickey's been really consistent. I don't remember them ever having a 3 that looks as good as Drew Dickey has in practice. So those are some things. The receiving core, in my opinion, the best on the team. But the other side of that is the inability to stop the passing game, which was a theme a year ago. Now, look, to be fair, a lot of that damage is being done where the safeties would be. I would guess DeRicky Wright, Jalen Mahoney, and C.J. Taylor might have combined to play 10 to 20% of the snaps so far. So they're doing that mostly against guys who aren't going to be starting. Luke, what do you make of the secondary and their struggles against the passing game so far?
Well, 2 things. First of all, on a scrimmage, and I'm just speaking from experience of all the years I was out there on the field watching the team at this time of the development. And you can't really tell a whole lot about the pass rush because the quarterback can't be hit. And they are told repeatedly, don't touch the quarterbacks, don't touch the quarterbacks. So what that does to you is, for instance, a Darren Agu. He's wanting to pin his ears back and go at it, and he can't really do that because if he does, he can still accidentally hit the quarterback, hurt him, put him out for the season, and then you got a mess on your hands. So I think you can't really tell, and you guys tell me I was not at the scrimmage, but there had to be some situations where the quarterback would have been sacked or moved off of his spot that they wouldn't have been able to complete some of those passes. So I think that's one thing I take from it every time this time of year during this time of practice. And I just think when the season starts, you'll see a pass rush that Vanderbilt hasn't had in a long time. I think because of the bodies that's going to be able to throw at people. You can throw a guy in and he can go 110 in the first quarter, whereas it used to be he's got to pace himself just to be able to play in the fourth quarter. And that's a huge thing that you're not going to see until we get into live action and the real bullets start flying.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Chris. I completely agree with Luke, and we got a question about this, about the pass rush, and obviously there was some concern from fans. Was the O-line creating any holes? Were the running backs are they not good? And I answered that on the board. I said the front seven has been active, right? I mean that front seven, and not just the defensive lineman, but Kane Patterson, Langston Patterson. I know Bryce Cowan didn't play in the scrimmage, but I mean, they are getting penetration consistently. Even some of the younger guys like a Jalen Ruth, who in practice has impressed me. So I agree with Luke in that, but also on the receivers, the young receivers, Chris, London Humphreys and Junior Sherrill. Those are guys that the coaching staff knew exactly what they were getting when they got on campus. And I think if you're a Nashville native, you saw what they did in the city of Nashville, right? London Humphreys at CPA, Junior Sherrill at Lipscomb Academy. I think that's an interesting aspect to this. Those guys didn't have to really travel at all for their college experience, and they probably got tight with some of the guys even before they got on campus. And I think that was an added benefit. So they're way ahead than the normal, I think, freshman receivers typically are, right? They're both from Nashville. They played high school in Nashville at least. So, I mean, and those are guys that, like, Humphrey's speed is not a typical freshman speed. Like Sherrill, and I asked Sherrill this after practice, and he's known to be a guy that has game speed. He said, yeah, I feel like I can click it on during the game. So a big difference with this class is that you see guys that are ready to go and can play, and I don't know about make an impact, but they can be out there and hold their own at least in SEC competition. So just to add on your wide receiver note there, Chris.
Again, going back to 2 years ago, or even last year, we didn't have any guys that could take the top off the defense. You do that now. When you put those two guys out there along with Jaden McGowan, they have to respect that. You used to not have to do that. And I think that's what you're going to see, especially in these early games. I think you'll see Vanderbilt have more explosive plays than they had for the entire year, just about, in the first 4 games.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on the front seven guys. I think it's a better group than they've had in a while. I don't know that there's a superstar in there. I like Agu on one end. I feel like he's solidly going to have that end job. Across from him, they've got DeCosmo seems to have held that job at the star position through spring. I'll be interested to see if Miles Capers can make a charge. He's back in the middle. They got Lee Wataha and Demarion Thomas, a true freshman who's getting some reps at, I guess, the nose spot. They've got Nate Clifton's had a really good camp at the tackle spot. They moved him inside. Davion Davis is out there, but clearly behind Clifton. And they've got Bradley Mann, presumably is a third teamer there. Better than what they usually have. Mann's going to play. And oh, by the way, Christian James hasn't been out there yet. They'll have him at some point. The linebackers, I feel like, have done well. They have gotten after the passer some. Both the Pattersons have had good camps. Bryce Cowan, I don't know exactly what to do with him yet. It's kind of like a CJ Taylor situation a year ago. Not quite as many plays, but he's versatile. They've got him at linebacker, but I think he could easily be that anchor guy. But that's where CJ Taylor is when he's back. Ethan Barr's still there, battling with Langston Patterson. They've got two very different skill sets, and both going to see the field. Luke, I'll start with you. I feel a lot better about the front seven having watched it in practice.
Oh, there's no question. And again, go back to the depth thing. But one other one you didn't mention, and Devin Lee. I think Devin has to be a terrific.
Yeah, and he's been starting. That wasn't an intentional omission. Yeah,
right. When you have Davion Davis now becoming, who was really a captain and a bell cow 2 years ago, now he's just a extra piece that might play 10, 12 snaps. That's how far that position and the defensive line has come. I'm probably, and I even mentioned this, Chris, when we had podcasts at the end of last year after we kind of did a season end review. I just felt like this season, because of the depth situation, and something that Vanderbilt very rarely has since, I say James Franklin. Let's go back to that. You always refer to that because of success, the wins and losses. But it took Bobby Johnson, I would say, 5 years before he had this type of depth. And it's now only year 3. And again, hats off to Barton and Clark and the rest of the coaches.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the defensive line, you hear the word depth a lot thrown around, right? We like our depth this year. We think we're too deep at that defensive line spot on the edge and then on the interior. But I think that really does apply this year. Now, I think there's a difference between experienced depth and young talent as depth, right? And we talked about that last episode, Chris. Like a guy like a Bradley Mann projects like a really good player, right? And so does Darren Agu, right? We saw some flashes from Agu last year, but I don't know that the defensive line has. Now they've got some guys that have proven depth, like a Christian James, like a Davion Davis, guys that have been there. But the younger guys, it's almost like you're waiting and seeing, all right, what can these guys do this year, right? How quickly can they progress into the player that the staff wants them to be? So I think it's now there are proven guys at that defensive line spot, but at the end of the day, those young guys, I think that how the defensive line succeeds depends on the speed of those young guys and how they can develop, like a Bradley Mann. I know Agu's a sophomore. But Chris, we've seen it, right? We've seen those guys flash. Bradley Mann looks dramatically bigger. I asked that to Larry Black, and he was like, yeah, he called him a monster, So it's been really impressive to see the organization, and you can tell that Barton Simmons and Clark Lee are in constant contact. It shows with the organization on the depth chart. So, Chris, the defensive line, I agree with you. They'll be better. How much better? That might depend on the young guys and how much of an impact they can make.
Yeah, I agree with that. Another thing, Billy, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the offensive line. Maybe that's good. And again, Luke pointed out something. It's hard to judge right now because you can't go all out. But one thing that I do like, for lack of not doing anything else, they have rolled out the same 5 starters, I think, every single day with the same guys in the same spot. And left tackle to right tackle, they go Hansen, Castillo, Hernandez, Ashmore, Uzebu. Those guys have stayed healthy and they've stayed in the same spots. And I think that continuity has to help them.
There's no doubt. I mean, that's something that I haven't even really talked much about. But I think Clark Lee, if you asked him, would be happy about that, right? The offensive line, there's no storylines, there's no talk. They're getting to work and they're getting after it. Uzebu is a guy, Chris, that quite frankly, I've been, pleasantly surprised by him. I think there's a couple vocal leaders on that offensive line. And that left tackle spot is interesting to me, right? Gunnar Hansen has shown a nastiness about him in camp. And, he's looked really good, and so I think they like their left tackle spot. But again, they like some of those guys behind the starters too, which, depth just keeps coming back with this team. I mean, Grayson Morgan is another guy, Chris, that, I mean, he looks like he could start, right? And last season he did not look like he could start. So the quick progression, right? You're seeing that from year to year already. I mean, I think they like Gage Pitchford. I think, there's what's the guys? There's several other offensive line that they like. I know you have the depth chart in front of you, Chris, but when you look at that offensive line group, continuity, right? You got 4 starters back from last season, and that can't hurt you. I mean, that certainly can't hurt you. Now, protecting the passer, I think that's another level. Like in the running game, I think you can expect some good things from that offensive line this year. Protecting A.J. Swan, and I'm sure we'll get to, is a different type of challenge.
Luke, we've talked a lot about most position groups. We kind of have touched maybe a little bit more on defense and offense. We talked about the quarterbacks a little bit, the receivers. We haven't talked a lot about the running backs. That's a question that I have. I don't know that I'm sold on any of the guys, but feel free. I think we're going to go to the mailbag in a moment because we've got about a dozen questions, and I have a feeling that's going to tie up a lot of the things that we want to talk about. But anything that you've got on the running back room, or maybe something big picture that we've not touched on yet that you want to get in here?
Well, the running back room more than any, we talk about the biggest question marks coming into the season with the running backs and the corners. Not necessarily the entire secondary, but the corners. And I still think that's the question marks. I do think that they have, again, like Billy said, quality depth, but it's young depth. So you have to worry about that on the defensive side. Now, at running back, you got the same thing. You have Smith and Gillespie, but after that, it's all unproven freshman talent. And you guys know as well as I do, the first time you get swung at, it feels like you got hit by a picnic table. It's different than high school. They may get hit one time in high school the way as hard as they're going to get hit in a Southeastern Conference football game. So that's going to make them decide whether they want to, take it to the next level. And I think Newberry, Diego Benson, those guys, one of them will pop up. That's just the way it works. I don't have a crystal ball to know which one it will be, but you'll see one of those guys get split the carries with Gillespie and Smith.
Billy, let's grab the mailbag as soon as you're ready here.
Let's do it. The mailbag is sponsored by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200 to see what your rights are and if they can help. All right, let's start with Denver Door. Has A.J. Swan shown a noticeable improvement since last year? And if so, what looks different and how will that reflect on his performance this season? Chris, start with you.
I don't know that he's looked any better or any worse. I mean, he was pretty good to end the year. I feel like he's probably a little bit better. I still see some of the same stuff. The good, the bad. That's, hey, I can make this throw, and you're like, boy, he sure can. He just did. And then it's the next play, I can make this throw. Well, there's another defensive back there that maybe would disagree with that. So you see some of that. I feel like the quarterback spot's in good hands, but I would like to see AJ's decision-making improve a little bit. How about you, Luke?
Same thing. I will say one thing about AJ, in the words of Woody Woodenhofer, he's gotten bigger, stronger, and faster. He looks the part. He did look the part anyway, but he even looks more the part now. He is a big, thick kid, so you hope that he stays away from the injuries because of that, and be a little bit more evasive as a quarterback. I don't think he's going to be it's going to be an issue at all, because I think that old line that we talked about will protect him and give him the time he needs. I think you're going to see a totally different offense. Mike Wright, I don't know what percentage it was, but he was in the games a lot more than AJ. And this offense will be daylight and dark of what they're trying to get accomplished and how.
All right, next
Billy,
question.
you're welcome to, and by the way, you're welcome to chime in with your thoughts on some of these too, or if you just trust us to get some of them and have nothing else to add, that's fine. But if you have some housekeeping or opinions, once we get through each of these, you're free to chime in too.
I appreciate it. I think you guys hit it with AJ. That it's similar to the offensive line, right? I think a minor thing would be decision making, like you said, Chris. But as expected, in the first couple weeks of camp, he's maybe allowed to take a few more chances, or he might think he's allowed to. But no, I think with AJ, he's made some massive throws, but a lot of it for you and I, and even Luke, Chris, it's almost normal. Like you know what AJ can do. He can do that. So I think you guys said it pretty well about AJ. All right, let's go to NBA Door. Please provide another update on investment from your sponsors, unless you want to save this one for the end, Chris.
Since you mentioned it, let's get it now.
Okay.
As you notice, we've got 2 new sponsors, Murfreesboro Pure Milk, which is they sell Purity dairy products. So if you're out there, you like your ice cream like I do, please frequent your Purity products and help those who help us. And my good buddy Steve Andrews at the Wash House. Now, unfortunately, we've lost, as we've added 2. We've lost 1 and maybe 2. And so we're kind of right back where we started after a summer of begging and pleading. So I will just say this. I continue to be committed to improving our product. I brought you on. I'm going to get you a little bit of money. I have secured some funding for Joey. Of course, unfortunately, it means less in my pocket and less that we have to travel or anything with. So we've got some giant holes in our budget at the moment. We would love more support. I'll just say this. If the people out there who can afford to do this, that are Vanderbilt fans, don't do this, we will not get support anywhere. That it just does not work as a venture, because we're competing against other things and other teams that just have much bigger audience. Again, we're the biggest audience in the Vanderbilt market, but you see the crowds on game days. It is just always a tough sell. We appreciate the people who have helped us. We are going to open probably a Patreon at some point too. And that might serve as sort of a tip jar to help us all out a little bit. But we are needing some partners, some businesses, or if anybody, just an individual, would like to write a nice sized check. At this point, there's not going to be any travel. I need to pay you more than I'm going to. And I've got, unless I want to work till I'm 95, I've got bills to pay at home too. So all that to say that if you are looking to help us out, God knows we got a lot of ways that people can help at this point. And if you are interested, email me at chrislee70@gmail.com and we will talk more.
There you go. And again,
next one in the mailbag.
All right.
Yeah,
next
go ahead.
one.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, the coverage, if you haven't noticed already, we're busting our tails. So again, if you want to sort of reward that and continue receiving this coverage, we look forward to potentially receiving an email, so we will, again, this is something, and I said it from the beginning, that Vanderbilt fans have never seen. And I truly believe that, we've got so many plans that a lot of fans don't even really know about yet. And so, we want you guys a part of this. And that's the only way this can survive. So I just wanted to add that.
If I can, I'd like to add something too. I have in the past talked to a lot of former players, and I know there are some players on the site, but other players that watch us on YouTube or whatever. And, reach out to me if you have questions of where's everyone always wants to know where their money's going and why you need it and all that. I'll be glad to ask those questions. And if I can't answer them, I'll get you to Billy or Chris. But guys, if you want the best coverage of Vanderbilt, and again, I've been around it for my entire life, since I was 12 years old, been on the sidelines, and this is as good as it gets, and it's not going to get any better. So hopefully, you guys will step forward.
Yeah. I guess I'll just stop there. There's probably a little bit more to add, but I think people get the gist of it. Yeah. All right. Next one in the mailbag.
All right. Next one. Here we go. And this is a good one. I've been asked it multiple times. VU Matt 23. Who will be the starting corners week 1? Luke, we'll start with you on this one.
That's a good question.
Week 1 will be Clark will reward guys who've been there. It'll be Anderson and Russell.
I
would. Boy, Billy, that has been an interesting battle.
It really has. It really has. We talked about Martell Height and Trudell Berry. Those guys look the part, right? And they will get opportunities.
They'll play.
If a gun was to my head, I would agree with Luke. Just because that's feels like Clark's style.
Well, when you say look the part, athletically they do. They have been on the receiving end of some burnings too, which that happens to freshmen. So there's a long way to go. When the receivers are making these catches in practice, they're doing it against somebody, and you'd like to see that get better. So, and I think having better safety help would help that some, but that's just not where they are right now. So, next one.
All right, next one from Foghorn. Is our O-line better at pass protection or run blocking? So, and this is a
Luke,
two-part.
I'm gonna throw that to you. I think it's just hard to tell. I've always thought the running game was a tough thing to evaluate, and the pass rush, for reasons you pointed out, they just can't go all out at this point. They've only had one tackling practice so far. So to me, it's, I don't know. I tend to think probably pass blocking, but I'm not sure, Luke.
Well, last year we were more of a run offense, obviously. You're not going to see that this year. So I'm hoping it's a 50-50 split, because I think if we run for 150 a game or 125 even, I'll be very happy, because I think we're going to have to throw it for 300 a game anyway to win most games. So they got to be to be evasive right down the middle. They got to be good at both. And for anybody to be a successful football team, they got to be good at both. So I think they will be. First of all, they have a star as a coach. Coach Blazik, to me, is a star. And I've seen a lot of good O-line coaches at Vanderbilt. He's one of the best.
Yeah, and they've got some former Commodores helping them out as
Chris
well.
Williams and somebody, absolutely.
Yeah, and those guys were stars as well. So, just another move, from this coaching staff that might be small, but they're all about the details. So, yeah, that's a tough question to answer at this point in time. Gun to my head, just from what I saw last year, run blocking, maybe. But, again, I think the hope, as Luke said, is that it's a 50-50 split. So, again, my gut tells me run game, but again, who knows? Maybe the pass protection surprises some people. He had a second part, Chris. If you could pick one area for A.J. Swan to improve upon over last year, what would it be?
Decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, throwing late over the middle.
Yes. Yeah.
Or trying to make throws where you are outnumbered.
And we've seen a little bit of that where, he makes a couple reads and progressions and just kind of, you don't see a ton of confidence on the throw. So I would say that. Okay, let's move on. Joey Dwyer, longtime listener, first time questioner. What should I expect in regards to the First Bank Stadium media food? Chris, I think you should be able to answer this.
It probably depends on the time of day. If it's an 11 o'clock kickoff, it's a sausage biscuitish stuff. The food, actually, I'll give credit to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's really upped its media food game the last couple of years. I've heard people on other podcasts talk about how bad the food has been in the press box in Nashville. I got to give those guys credit. They've stepped it up to where you get sometimes you get some of Nashville's better barbecue places. You get some good briskets and things like that. So I have no qualms about the food. They even did an espresso bar, I think, for the Ole Miss game last year. And I'm not a coffee drinker. I say that I'm becoming one out of necessity some days when the energy drink is not in reach. So that's been kind of nice too. But I think if the food game is on par with what it's been the last couple of years, I've got no complaints. Now, in the past, sometimes that's been, box sandwiches and stuff like that, and that's okay. But I think if they do what they did a year ago, it was not a bad spread.
Joey, appreciate the question. I don't really have an answer to that. I haven't been in the press box for a game, but I look forward to what Chris has called some good options. So looking forward to that. All right, let's move on to the next one from Raiders 1967. Please discuss the process that led to the hiring of Tommy McClelland and the duties he performed at Vanderbilt. Is there speculation on a replacement?
Luke, I'm throwing that one to you.
I appreciate it. I can shed some light on it. He was a Daniel Dearmeyer hire. At the time, Daniel didn't know the situation in athletics. He was feeling his way through, and he wanted someone that he could communicate with on a daily basis. And when he had people that came to see him, he could have Tommy show him around campus and that type of thing. And that was the role that Tommy initially took over. And then his role grew from there to fundraiser. I mean, Tommy did everything as a deputy AD that most ADs would do. So, you know, that's just kind of how it went. And I don't feel any ill will toward Tommy. In fact, I respect him a lot. I liked him a lot the times I dealt with him. And I wish him well at Rice.
I'll miss Tommy. I saw him at practice here, but I didn't get to speak to him. Didn't get to know him super well, but he was always nice to me, and I wish him luck in his next job. He certainly worked hard while he was here.
Yep.
Okay, next up, Billy.
All right, next one from Raiders 1967. Vandy will likely only be favored in 3 games this year. We'll see. What is a realistic number of wins?
I don't think he's wrong about his presumption. Luke, I want to get your take first.
Go back to what I've been saying for now over a year, and I haven't changed. I won't budge on it. I think we're going to a bowl, and I think we'll have 6 wins when we play Tennessee. So 7 max, and the least amount we're going to have 6. I know that's ambitious for a lot of folks out there. You know, we've only been to 9 bowls in my lifetime. Well, actually 8. I wasn't alive for the Gator Bowl. But, you know, I can see the progression. And I worked for 11 different coaches at Vanderbilt, and I can see their progressions. So I've kind of been, not that I'm a soothsayer, but I kind of can tell when you have a shot. And this team has a shot. You know, and again, you always have to preface that by saying, if we stay semi-healthy. And by that, you can't have certain guys get hurt. We won't mention guys' names, but you guys know what I mean. They can't have that because then that depth that you've now built up goes away. So if we stay semi-healthy, I think it's going to be a fun year for Vandy fans.
My opinion, guys, I think they're a better team. I think they could go 5-7 again and be a much better team. But to me, I just have trouble naming the 6 wins. Now, I think you guys will agree with me on this. I'm looking at the schedule to make sure I get this right. Hawaii, Alabama, A&M at UNLV. Get all 3 of those, not much question in my mind. And if they don't, there's a problem, right? So we're all on the same page there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think at Wake is gettable. And if they're going to get 6, Luke, is that fair to call that one a must win?
No, for me. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Go ahead. Keep going down your schedule.
Well, I mean, okay, and the next 2 after that, Kentucky and Missouri, both at home, and then at Florida. Obviously, they won 2 of those 3 a year ago, and then they lost the Missouri game in Columbia. I think Missouri is a little better than people are giving credit for. A lot of people are really on the Kentucky hype train, thinking they can maybe challenge Tennessee for the 2 spot. I'm not as convinced about that. I think with Liam Cohen, they'll get better on offense. I just am not. I'm not as sold on them, I think, as some other people. I think they're a good team. Could they be a top 25 team? Sure. And then at Florida, and I think Florida's one where they've got a real shot in. But there's a little bit of a hype train on Florida lately, and I'm a big fan of Billy Napier. I just look at the talent and I don't see it. So I don't know whether I'm right or a lot of the public that's kind of getting on the Florida bandwagon late is right. So to me, a lot of the damage has got to be done in those first 7 games. Then you go Georgia, at Ole Miss. Auburn here I think is doable. At South Carolina, that is perpetually just a stumbling block for them. So Billy, I'll start with you. If they get 6, where do they get them? And then I'll give Luke the floor to finish what he started a minute ago.
Well, I agree with you, and I think this is pretty obvious. Hawaii, Alabama A&M, and UNLV, those all 3 should be wins. At Wake Forest, that game feels like, looking at the schedule, it feels like a must-win. But I like how Luke brought up the end of that. He didn't reveal his answer, but I like how he brought it up. I haven't thought about it because later in the seasons, these Clark Lee teams have gotten better, right? Where, I mean, remember the Ole Miss game, Chris, was that year 1 on the road where you're like, I know Vanderbilt lost, but I mean they fought their tails off and put up a good fight. So I know they didn't win the game, but they have played better down the stretch of the season. And so I think, you look at some of those games, of course, Kentucky and Missouri, those 2 are games that I think, especially them being at home, if you win one of them, you're in a good spot. If you find a way to win both, you're all of a sudden in the driver's seat, for a bowl game, considering you have won your 3 non-conference. At Florida, who knows what that Florida team is going to be? Clark Lee is a guy that, he goes on the road. You feel like that team has a chip on their shoulder. Year 1 in Gainesville didn't go well, of course. So I think Florida could be a potential spot for Vanderbilt to get a win. At Ole Miss, obviously that'll be tough. I like Vanderbilt in that Auburn game. I don't know why, but I do. I just think Hugh Freeze in year 1, that could be a potential spot where maybe a Florida type game this past season where, a lot of transfers where guys have just sort of, and I don't want to say given up, but sort of packed it in, and again, maybe that doesn't happen, but I think that could be a situation where that happens. It's tough. My gut tells me, okay, as a fan, you should expect 6 wins, right? As the coaching staff, you should expect 6 and not 6, but a bowl, right? A postseason berth. I'm still sitting in the middle of 5 and 6, 5 and 6 wins, right? I think they could go 5 and 7 and be a lot better team than last year. But I could easily see this team going 6 and 6. And maybe, just maybe, 7 and 5 if things go right, and things went right last year for Vanderbilt against Florida and Kentucky. And I see the progression of this program. But again, Chris, you've seen it. Luke, you've seen it. Watching Vanderbilt football, you can progress as a program, but it may not show in the win-loss column. So again, I'm sitting right in the middle of 5 and 6 wins right now. Maybe that'll change, if something happens here in fall camp that I see that I like. But I think this team can definitely get to a bowl game. I mean, that is certainly a possibility. Luke?
Well, let me explain the Wake thing. The reason why I don't think it's a must win. If you look at last year, if you would started to say after we started the season, did anyone think after the first 4 games we would beat Florida and Kentucky? I don't think anyone did. So that tells you 2 things. It tells you, number one, sometimes the teams we play later in the schedule in the conference, no matter who they are, how good they may or may not have been. I mean, Florida took Tennessee to the wire, almost came back and won that game. And we all know how good they were last year. Kentucky was ranked when we beat them. Whether they were beat up, injured, whatever, we still won at Lexington. When you take those things into consideration, and that tells you 2 things. Number one, what type of character Clark is building with these kids. And number 2, how the opponents view Vanderbilt later on in the season. They may not want to play a Vanderbilt, and Auburn may not want to. So you can get 3 SEC wins for sure. If you get those 3 other non-conference, that adds up to 6 in my book. So that's the reason why Wake is not, in my opinion, a must-win. Because I think I can see 3 SEC wins in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, they got Florida and Kentucky a year ago. We're that close to Missouri, and the Auburn's one. That is one that I've circled too. I just don't think they're nearly as talented as your typical Auburn team. Now, I think their offensive coach, obviously Hugh Freeze, is probably a top 5 offensive coach in football, and that matters too. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's hard for me to name them because you kind of feel silly because a lot of these games, they're going to be a touchdown.
Right.
Hey, look at this moron. He picked Vandy to beat such and such. But I think Luke hit the nail on the head. Sometimes the schedule kind of comes back to them in a way where teams aren't as up for games as they were for whatever reason. Or I'm not, I say that's just detracting from what Vanderbilt did a year ago. That they played, heck, they beat Anthony Richardson, who was a top 5 pick. So take nothing away from them, but I think the way that Luke mapped it out is the way that if it were to happen, that it would. Okay, Billy, what have we got next?
All right, here we go. From Vandy Zach 7, he provides a fun fact. Vanderbilt went 2-1 in one-score SEC games last year. In the other 5, they lost by an average of 40 points per game, while being held to 3 points or less in 3 of the 5 games. Do you agree that there's a very real chance that this team is substantially better in almost every facet this year, but finishes with a worse overall record?
Luke, I'll start there with you. I've already opined on that. I said that before we answered the last question, and a lot of that was what Zach pointed out, that don't get beat by 160 points between 3 teams or whatever it was. So I think that alone, just not getting the brakes beat off you in those blowouts would help. But Luke, I want to hear your thoughts on this one.
I agree with that. Of course, they could only win 5. They could only win 4 and be better. But here's the thing. I don't think, first of all, you don't play Georgia and Alabama back-to-back. I think Georgia and Tennessee, obviously, they would be the 2 teams that you would think offensively we have a really tough time stopping, and you can't outscore them. So just take those 2 and put them to the side. There's at least 10 football games that you have a shot. First of all, we're so due to beat South Carolina, it's just bound to happen at some point in our lives. We've had more trouble with South Carolina than we've had with Tennessee or Florida or any of the other teams. We've had more success against Georgia than we had South Carolina in the last 15 years. So, that's going to pop up and we're going to hit them one of these times. If Spencer Rattler is the old Spencer Rattler that started last season, there's another game you can get. So I agree to the fact that, yeah, you can win 4 or 5 games and be better. Bobby Johnson had a couple of teams like that. There were really good football teams that lost in the fourth quarter. Stuff like that can happen, obviously. But I think, again, stay healthy. I'm sticking to my guns. We'll get to 6.
And Clark Lee, Chris, you remember hearing this from him at SEC Media Days. He said this season is going to come down to a handful of plays, right? This season is going to come down to maybe not in the UNLV in the non-conference games, but against Kentucky, Missouri, Auburn, Florida, maybe throw South Carolina in there. If you convert those handful of plays, right, you'll be there. But if you don't, you may not be. So the margin is still small, and they've talked about that, right? The margins are still pretty small. Now they may have gotten a little bit bigger, but they're still there. So yeah, and I agree with you, Luke, on the South Carolina thing. I'm not as high on South Carolina coming into this season as a lot of other people are. Do you get the same Spencer Rattler late in the season? I think in those last 4 games, Ole Miss, Auburn, South Carolina, and Tennessee, Vanderbilt should pick off one of those, especially if they want to make a bowl game. They could pick off 2. I think they could. That's obviously unlikely, but I think they could because of how well they've played down the stretch.
Well, I think people know that I run an SEC YouTube channel, so I'm spending a lot of time studying those other teams. And I think South Carolina could be a top 25 team, but the hype train has gotten, I don't know, a little towards the top end, I guess is a good way to put it. I'm not saying that they can't be as good as their fans think they can. And I really do like Shane Beamer. I think Carolina pins a lot of its hopes on the fact that they shortened the playbook a year ago. And the minute they did that is when they beat Clemson and Tennessee and gave Notre Dame a run for its money in the bowl game. So I think that there are reasons there that people in South Carolina are excited. Plus the fact that he took over a pretty bad roster too. Wasn't as bad as Vanderbilt's, but in 2 years, he had them beating those teams at the end of the year. I like what he's doing there. I think they're a good team. I think that's going to be a tough one. But I do wonder a little bit if a little too much hope is being placed in what they did at the end of the year, and that's what they are, rather than it being maybe a small sample size. I guess
Mhm.
time will tell. But the bad thing for Vandy is that game comes at the end of the year, and that's always when Beamer. I mean, I say always. It's been 2 years, but he's had them playing substantially better ball in November than he did before that. So, next question, Billy.
All right, here we go. We've got another one from NBA Door. Let's see. Let me read this one, make sure it's okay. Okay, here we go. NBA Door. What sort of production from the run game is required for AJ Swan to be a top 5 quarterback in the SEC this year?
I'm going to throw that to you guys. Luke, I'll let you start first here.
I mentioned it earlier. I think we're going to run for at least 100 yards a game on average, 125. And I think that doesn't sound like a whole lot. You want to be balanced. You want to be 150 and 300. But I think we're going to be more of a passing team, obviously, than we were last year. So I don't think I think what you'll see in the running game, and I think I may have saw someone on the board. So whoever said this on the board, I'm copying you on this and agreeing with you on this. You're going to see 1 and 2 yard gains, maybe 1 or 2 yard losses. Then all of a sudden, one of those guys is going to pop it for 50. Whereas Ray Davis, as tough of a runner he is, he didn't have that breakaway speed. I think you'll see that in these backs. I think they may have 10 carries, and you look back and 9 of the carries were for a total of 20 yards, and then 1 carry for 60. So I think that's where it'll be in the run game.
Yeah, and the question, the way it's worded, to be a top 5 quarterback makes it a little tough. I think that's a tough ask for Swan this year.
That is a tough ask. Yeah.
But answering the question, I think it might need to be upwards of 180. Because I was looking at Tennessee's rushing stats per game last year, and obviously they threw the ball a lot. But Vanderbilt, that's what Vanderbilt wants to be more similar to this year, and not Tennessee's offense, of course, but a similar style of maybe more tempo, maybe more, hopefully more explosive. And so I think you've got to be probably upwards if you want to be a top 5 quarterback in the SEC, upwards of 180, maybe 190. But again, to Luke's point, I don't think you have to be to look at Swan and say, okay, he had a successful season. I don't know that he has to be close to 200, and the running backs have to be close to 200. I think if you're sitting, 110, 120, and you're throwing for 300, maybe even 400 yards a game, like you're winning games, and that's a good recipe to make a bowl game. So. It's a tough ask in terms of the top 5 quarterback in the SEC, but I would say 180, 190 to answer that question. And then the second part of that, he's got, let's see, with our apparent running back by committee approach, who will have the most yards and how many will it be? So very specific there, but I guess to translate, who's going to end up being the guy?
Right now, to me, it's Patrick Smith, guys. Do either of you have a different answer?
I agree.
I agree.
I do think it'll be some running back by committee stuff, but I think Patrick will emerge.
Yeah, I agree, and the coaches have touted running back by committee, and maybe that's it. That ends up what it is, right? But I think in terms of a guy, you would say Patrick Smith, to start the season at least. If he goes down with an injury, the good thing is they've got guys back there, right? That they like. They like Gillespie. They like, Newberry and Benson. And like you said, Luke, one of those guys is going to have to step up, and that'll be something to watch this season. All right, rolling along here. Looks like we've got 2 more. Raiders 1967. This is a good one. Who were the best offensive and defensive assistant coaches you observed at Vanderbilt?
Luke?
For me, okay. As a position coach or a coordinator, I'm assuming he's saying as either one. I'll just go with position coaches. Offensive line, Robbie Caldwell is the best offensive line coach I ever saw at Vanderbilt. Defensively, and we've had a lot of good ones, don't get me wrong. Defensively, Woody Woodenhofer knew how to call the defense on the fly and knew how to read an offense better than anyone I ever saw. And I'll give you a quick story. I know we've gone long here, but I got to give this quick story. Everyone always wants to hear Woody stories. We played Tennessee when Peyton Manning was a senior. and we lost 17-10 in Knoxville. And I was going to midfield to shake hands with Roger Frazier, who was our equipment manager, and Woody was right beside me shaking hands with Fulmer. And Fulmer was patting Woody on the back. Woody, boy, your guys played hard and all this. And Woody said, yeah, Philip, if I had your guys, I'd beat you by 100. So that was a fun day and a great comment by Woody. And it was true. Woody knew, Peyton Manning, if you look at his history, never threw for over 150 yards against Vanderbilt.
Wow. I'd say that's a staggering stat, Chris.
It is. It is.
Yeah, I remember that. It was those defenses were something. Now they couldn't move the ball against the three of us, but right. Yeah.
Interesting. Great question for Luke. All right, let's close it out. Colombiano Door. He says, off topic, but you know what other guests are planned this season outside of Luke? He says he misses when Corey Chavis and Mitch Light would join, though there clearly could be scheduling issues there. So, Chris?
Yeah, I'll answer that. Again, a lot depends on funding and what time we have. I just think you and I have spent a lot of time talking for what we have. I think more than 3 podcasts right now a week is a reach. And I think it's going to be probably 1 for the next couple of weeks. And I think that the week the season starts, week 0, leading up to that, we'll do some more stuff. But I think our plan is going to be more than likely we will have a post-game show that we'll do like this. We hope to have them at a location near campus for home games. For road games, we'll probably all do them from our homes. And I think that we'll post after the game. We'll post that to the podcast feed, the audio only later. I think Wednesday, I'll have to talk to Luke to see when he's available. I think Wednesday will be like a roundtable show. That might be when we can have a Corey or a Will Purdue or somebody on with us potentially with hopefully the 3 of us. And then Billy, I'm going to turn the reins over to you to do probably a pregame show that we'll put out probably sometime Thursday or Friday. We'll probably have someone from Vanderbilt on. We will probably have an opposing beat writer for a few minutes. Maybe we'll have an athlete or something like that. I don't know what we'll have just yet. We'll get that in process. But other than that, guys, again, a lot of it's just kind of a funding and a time thing. I've got my hands full with my stuff on the SEC side. Billy's got his hands full with his stuff with George. I think there will be some weeks where we do maybe a 4th where seasons overlap. Maybe especially basketball and football. That'll probably be you and Joey. And again, we might have one of those guys on occasionally if we can fit him in. But I just think with the resources we have of time and money, it's harder for us than ever to do those. Additionally, Corey can be a tough guy to pin down with his travel schedule. I think we'll have him on probably an episode or 2. Mitch, I think, is just so busy with the athlete. And that's the other thing too. It's hard to find people in the media who just have time to talk about it, because it's not a beat where your bread gets buttered and people are chasing the Titans and whoever else. So I guess the short answer would be we may have some of those guys on occasionally, but until we get a little bit more to work with here, I wouldn't count on that being as a regular part of the show.
And I'll add this too, Chris. The question was about other guests. Well, an answer to that is you guys, right? The fans, right? That's what we want. We want you guys to be a guest and like you're in the room with us, right? Firing your questions away if you're mad or you're excited after a game, right? To fire those in, and we're going to do our best to answer those in the post game shows, but also during the week with the mailbags. And if there's a big injury or a big piece of news, I'm sure I'll get on and do an emergency podcast if we have to. And I said this earlier, we're flexible, right? If Chris doesn't have time for something, I can hop in, or Joey can hop in, or if Luke and I, want to do one, I'm sure we can. If Chris is busy with other stuff, right? There's more team members now, which I think is the good thing. So I think one of the guests is you guys, the fans, right? And we want you guys to be as involved as ever. And hopefully that creates some really good content.
All right, guys. Parting thoughts here. I'll go Billy, Luke, and then myself. just anything that we've seen at practice or picked up on that's relevant to Vanderbilt football as we end the show that maybe we didn't get into or you want to underline on our way out? Again, we'll start with you, Billy, then go to Luke.
Well, we haven't mentioned Will Shepherd, right? And he's a guy that you cannot forget about. He was just named to the Biletnikoff Award watch list.
How did we do that? I mean, that guy's been their most dominant player in camp when he's been out there.
Well, he didn't
right.
do a
and
ton
then
in
part
the
of it's
scrimmage.
been out there, but right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a precautionary thing, right? They're building up to the regular season with that. And Clark has said that, which is another aspect to Clark's style that I think fans can respect and media members can respect, right? I think there's some fans that, like, why did he only have one catch? Or, but again, this is the first scrimmage, as Luke said earlier, right? These are about the young playmakers. But on Will Shepherd, I mean, I think Vanderbilt's Twitter posted the video of him making one of the diving catches with his left hand, and all three of us were there and saw that. And I remember looking at Chris going, did he just do that? Like did he really just do that? And so it's things like that he's making normal, right? And it's been a bit since a Vanderbilt wide receiver has made plays like that, right? And even Jordan Matthews, I remember his freshman year, right? He would come in late in games and make catches like that. But the way Will Shepherd does it, and I said this in one of my post-practice reports, he just makes it look easy, right? And I don't want to say he's not trying because he is, but it almost looks like there's that nonchalant, aura about him that he's able to make it look easy. So again, Will Shepherd is a guy I wanted to throw out there because we hadn't mentioned him. The tight ends, Chris, Justin Ball had a reception in the scrimmage. I think Logan Kyle has looked good. I like Camryn Johnson. Obviously, he's a young kid, but Chris Boyle, keep an eye on him. I've liked what I've seen from him in camp, showing a couple flashes. He may not be as tall as some of the other guys, but I think he's a guy that can be versatile. So I think, I think of a guy like a Sam Dobbs, who maybe isn't the biggest guy, but is athletic and can block and maybe sneaks by a defender when they're not expecting it and makes a catch. So in terms of the receivers, obviously Will Shepherd is there, but the tight ends, I think, have been a little bit better than I expected. Like a Justin Ball has improved. So again, tight end is one of the positions there. And I know, Luke, we've talked about that. That's one of my parting thoughts because that's what they did a lot late last season. They involved those tight ends and it worked, right? So I think that's another question, at least from my perspective. But parting thoughts. Looking forward to this week at fall camp, and again another scrimmage at some point next weekend. So looking forward to it. But yeah, I thought I'd mention Will Shepherd, Luke. Unreal, we haven't mentioned him yet.
Well, that's a good thing because that means we're talking about all that depth and help he has now.
Right.
That's all we had to talk about before. So if Will Shepherd's an afterthought, that's actually a good sign. What I want to talk about a little bit is some of the walk-ons and how they contribute. Now, I'm not saying they're going to go out and make big splashes in games, but in these early games, I could see a couple of those guys helping. And the walk-on program, when Clark first got here, I think, if I may be off of my numbers a little bit, our total roster was around 95 to 98. It's now at 115, I think. So adding those quality walk-ons is huge to a football program. That was one of the first things James Franklin did when he got to Vanderbilt. He found out our numbers and said, look, we got to get bodies out here with walk-ons. We got just for looks and guys that bust their rear ends. And he had tryouts. And he got a couple of quality guys. But Clark and Barton and whoever else is responsible for that recruiting of walk-ons have done a fantastic job. And they're going to – if it doesn't pay dividends in a game, it's paying dividends in practice.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I meant to get to that at some point. We asked Clark about that the other day in practice. We ended up talking about walk-ons for 6 minutes between a couple of questions we asked. One of the things that I wanted to get to was how many of those are guys that just showed up on campus. How many of those guys were guys that you recruited? Because and his answer was most of them were recruited. And this is why this is important because, first of all, a walk-on is – Luke, you correct me if I'm wrong. It's been tough for them to get preferred walk-ons through school in the past, is it not?
Yes, I can count on one hand in the history of Vanderbilt that a walk-on earned a scholarship and also played a lot. Now, a lot of them have earned a scholarship for other reasons, just being a team guy. But like Joe Staley back on the bowl team in the 80s and John DeWitt on DiNardo's teams, those guys started and played a lot. But
Sanford
it's
Ware.
few and far between.
Yeah. Well, and this is why this is important. And Clark Lee mentioned it. He said they're getting more cooperation with admissions. Look, if they've got 115 guys, you only get 85 scholarships. That means you got 30 walk-ons. Most of them are preferred, which means they went through the admissions process, got admitted by the school. They weren't just, Joe on campus. Hey, football practice starts tomorrow. I'll show up and see if I can make the team. No, most of these guys were guys that they knew about ahead of time. That points to support from the school, and that's big. Those guys also, their walk-ons are so much better than the ones they have had in the past. What does that mean? I don't know. But Billy, you and I more than once and twice have raised our eyebrows at Richie Hoskins, who made a long touchdown in camp.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that was on the defense for not doing its job, but still, I don't ever remember guys, and it's got to help them in practice. I know it does. They're just so much more competent depth. The Nick Rinaldi, who has only been playing football for a couple of years now, made a big play in camp the other day. He helped them last year, not just special teams, but played some defensive snaps. So that is a sign of a program headed in a better direction. And I think their practice snaps are so much more competitive, which is going to help a lot. So thank you to Luke for mentioning that. I would say that there's still, I think we is to 2 years ago. There's still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things I'm watching. You still got some first and second team battles up for grabs. I'm really interested to see who wins that corner spot opposite of BJ Anderson. Still a lot of uncertainty. I'm not crazy about where they are at tight end or running back. The safety room is going to have to get healthy. Boy, if they don't, that is not going to be good news. Say all you want about their receivers getting better, and that's true. Their pass defense has got to take some big steps up in the coming weeks. And I think a lot of progress we have seen, but still a lot of questions to be answered. Still a long way to go at certain spots. But in any case, all right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Thank you for those out there who are listening. Thank you to our sponsors, Sutherland and Belk, Murfreesboro Pure Milk, and the Wash House. They help make this possible. For Billy Derrick and Luke Wyatt, I'm Chris Lee of VandySports. By the way, a lot of practice coverage at VandySports right now, so you get a lot of stuff there that you don't get here. If you're looking for ways to support our site, that's $99 a year. Please, if you're out there listening and haven't subscribed, please do that. That helps us. That helps us produce more content. If you are sharing a sub with somebody, please don't. That's taken away from what we can do and what we can make and what I can pay help. In any case, thank you for watching the VandySports Podcast. We may have a basketball episode up with Billy and Joey later in the week, depending on what they can do. If not, our next content will probably do a football show with the same three guys that you're looking at right now, maybe sometime early next week. Until then, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Again, subscribe to the website and follow us on social media accounts. For Billy Derrick, for Luke White, I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon at the VandySports Podcast.